My name is Earl Donovan. I'm 72 years old, and 3 weeks ago my own son stood up at my kitchen table, pointed at the hallway and said, "Either you move your stuff out of the master bedroom by tonight, or you find somewhere else to sleep. I mean it. Dad." He said it in the house I paid $800,000 in cash to help him buy. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I set down my fork, said okay, and carried my things out to the room over the garage like he asked. What he didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that I'd never actually given them that house. Not really. And what they really didn't know was that the moment his wife signed those refinance papers behind my back, she'd tripped a wire I'd buried in the paperwork 2 years earlier. In 30 days, they weren't going to be asking me to leave. They were going to be the ones with nowhere to go. Before I tell you how a retired contractor from Greenville, South Carolina ended up sleeping above a garage at 72, do me a favor and tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight. And if you've ever been treated like furniture by the people you raised, hit that like button and stick around, because I promise you the ending is worth it. It started the way these things always start. Slow, polite, with a lot of love in everybody's voice. My wife Carol passed 2 springs ago, 46 years of marriage. And then one Tuesday morning, she just didn't wake up. The doctors called it her heart. I called it the end of the only home I'd ever really had, because the house we'd lived in for 30 years stopped being a house the day she was gone. It became a museum. Every room had her in it. The kitchen still smelled like her coffee. I'd reach for the phone to tell her something and remember halfway through dialing. I rattled around in that place like a marble in an empty coffee can, and I'll be honest with you, I was drowning. That's when my son and his wife started coming around more. At first I was grateful. Lord, was I grateful. My son would show up on a Sunday with a bag of barbecue from the place I like, and his wife would sit with me at the table and ask me how I was sleeping, and I'd tell her not great, and she put her hand over mine and say, "Earl, you shouldn't be out here all alone." She never once called me Dad. Always, oh. I noticed it, and I told myself I was being a sensitive old man about it. She was from money, or wanted to be, and she had a way of talking that made you feel like you were already a little behind in the conversation. My son loved her, like a man loves a thing he's afraid he doesn't deserve. And I understood that, because that's how I'd loved Carol. The idea came up gently, the way a salesman gets you to the lot, before he ever mentions a price. "Earl, what if we all bought a place together?" she said one evening over a pot roast she'd made in my own kitchen. "Something new, no ghosts in it. You sell this old place, we put in our share, and you'd have family around you all the time. A grandbaby on the way someday. Wouldn't that be something? I want to tell you I saw it coming. I didn't. I just heard the word family and the word grandbaby, and I thought, yes, that's what I want." I'd spent 2 years eating dinner standing up at the counter, so I wouldn't have to look at Carol's empty chair, and here were 2 young people offering me a table full of people again. So I said yes, but understand something about me first. I spent 50 years in construction. I started swinging a hammer at 16, and I retired owning a company that put up half the strip malls and 3 of the schools in our county. You don't survive 5 decades in the building trade by being a soft touch with a contract. Carol used to say I read a purchase agreement the way some men read scripture. So even with my heart wide open and my judgment all clouded up with grief, my hands still did what 50 years had trained them to do. When we found the house, a big new build out in the hills past Traveler's Rest, 4 bedrooms, a wall of windows looking out over the ridgeline, the kind of place that costs you a fortune in propane to heat, I didn't just hand over my money and sign where they pointed. I went to see my attorney first, a fellow named Marcus Webb who'd handled my company's contracts for 20 years and knew me well enough to argue with me. I told him I wanted to put in $800,000 toward the house, but I didn't want to be a tenant in my own kid's home, and I didn't want to just gift it away either. He thought about it and he set the whole thing up clean. Here's how it worked, and pay attention, because this is the part they didn't bother to understand. We didn't get a regular bank mortgage on the place. I financed it myself. The kids and I put the house in their name, yes, but the $800,000 I put in wasn't a gift and it wasn't down payment charity. It was a private loan, secured by a first lien on the property. In plain English, I was the bank. My son and his wife owed me $800,000. The note was recorded against the house, and I held the paper. And tucked into that note, Marcus put it in, I almost told him not to bother, was a clause that said the borrowers could not take out any additional loan against the house. No second mortgage, no home equity line, no refinance, nothing, without my written consent as the lien holder. And if they did, the clause said the entire balance came due immediately. All 800,000, due in full, on demand. Marcus called it an acceleration clause. I called it overkill. Earl, he said to me, sliding the papers across his desk, this is the kind of thing I put in a commercial deal with people I don't trust. These are your kids. You sure you want a hammer like this in a family arrangement? And I'll never forget what I told him. I said, Marcus, the people I trust are exactly the ones I'd never need this against. Put it in. It's just paper. It'll sit in a drawer for the rest of my life, and nobody'll ever read it again. I signed it. They signed it. His wife signed it with a pretty little flourish and never read past the first page. I'd bet my truck on it. And we moved in together, and for about 4 months it was good. It was actually good. Then it started. It was small at first. The way these things are. They gave me the master bedroom when we moved in. Big room, walk-in shower, easy on my knees, looked out over the ridge. His wife had insisted on it, very sweetly. Earl deserves the best room. He made this possible. And I've been touched by that. But somewhere around month 5, the temperature in that house dropped about 10 degrees, and it never came back up. His wife stopped sitting with me, the hand over mine at dinner. Gone. When I'd come into a room, conversations would stop, and they'd both look at me with these flat, patient expressions, like I was a delivery that had shown up early. My son got quiet around me. He'd always been a talker, my boy. Now he'd mumble and look at his phone and let her do the talking. And the talking changed. It got clinical. Earl, you really shouldn't be running the stairs at your age. Earl, the master's so far from the kitchen. What if you fell in the night and we didn't hear you? Earl, we worry about you out here in the big room all by yourself. I'd hear the kindness in the words and feel the cold underneath them, and I started to doubt myself. Was I imagining it? Was I just a grieving old fool reading rejection into everything because I was scared of being alone again? I'd lie awake some nights, running conversations back in my head, trying to figure out if I was the problem. I want to stop here and say something to those of you who felt this. That doubt, that voice that says maybe you're being too sensitive, maybe you're the difficult one. That voice is the most dangerous thing in the world, because it's the thing that keeps good people standing still while somebody robs them blind. The first hard shove came on a Sunday. His wife sat me down at the table, my son hovering by the counter, not making eye contact, and she folded her hands and told me she was expecting a baby. They were going to need the master bedroom for the nursery. It was the biggest room closest to theirs, only made sense. And a second bedroom she needed for her work. She'd started doing some kind of online wellness business, and the third was going to be the baby's playroom eventually. And so the most practical thing, the loving thing really, would be for me to take the room over the garage. The room over the garage. I'd never finished it. It was studs and subfloor and a space heater, 110 degrees in July and cold enough to see your breath in January. There were 3 perfectly good bedrooms in that house, and they were sending a 72-year-old man up a set of pull-down stairs to sleep in an attic. I asked the obvious thing. I said, what about the guest room down the hall? Why not put the baby in there and let me keep a real bedroom? And she had an answer for everything. The guest room was for her mother's visits. The nursery had to be near them. On and on. Every door I knocked on, she had it locked before I got there. And my son just stood at the counter and studied the floor. Here's the part that I couldn't make peace with. She wasn't showing. Not a bit. And I built houses long enough to do arithmetic on a calendar. But I was so afraid of being the bitter old man, so afraid of losing the only family I had left, that I picked up a box of my things and I carried it up those pull-down stairs myself. I told myself it was temporary. A sacrifice for the grandbaby. That's what I told myself. I lasted about 6 weeks up there before the thing happened that woke me up. I'd come down one afternoon to use the real bathroom. The attic didn't have one. I'll let you sit with that. And the house was empty. They'd gone to one of her appointments. There was a stack of mail on the kitchen island and a torn envelope on top. And I wasn't snooping. I swear to you, the letter was just lying there face up. It was from a bank. And the line my eye caught, the line that stopped my heart cold, said the application for a home equity line of credit in the amount of $250,000 had been received and was being processed pending lien verification. A home equity line against the house. The house with my $800,000 first lien on it. The house they could not borrow against without my written consent. Consent nobody had asked me for. I stood in that kitchen with the lettuce shaking in my hand, and I felt 50 years of being a careful man come roaring back like blood into a numb leg. They were trying to pull $250,000 out of a house they didn't really own, behind the back of the man who actually held the note, and the lien verification pending. That was the bank about to call my attorney's office and ask why there was already a private lien recorded ahead of them. The whole thing was about to fall apart on its own. But that wasn't what had my hands shaking. $250,000. What in God's name did they need that for? A nursery doesn't cost that. Her little wellness business sure didn't. You don't quietly try to mortgage your own house up to the rafters for a crib and a coat of paint. That's not a renovation. That's a getaway fund. I put the letter back exactly how I found it, and I went upstairs and I called Marcus Webb. I'll never forget the sound of his voice changing on that call. He started out chuckling. "Earl, how's the mountain air, you old hermit?" And then I read him the line off that envelope, and it was a long silence. And when he spoke again, it was his courtroom voice, slow, flat, precise. "Earl," he said, "do you understand what they've just done?" "Tell me," I said, in plain words, like I'm one of my own grandkids. "They've applied to place a second lien on the property," he said. "That is a direct, recorded, provable violation of the loan you hold. The acceleration clause is triggered the moment they file that application, and they've filed it, which means your $800,000 note is no longer a 30-year arrangement. It's due, the entire balance, in full, on demand, today, if you want it." I sat down on the edge of that lumpy attic cot, and the springs groaned underneath me. "And if they can't pay it," I said, "which they can't, they don't have 800,000. They're trying to borrow $250,000 just to breathe." "Then you foreclose, Earl," he said, and I heard him take a breath. "You hold the first lien. You call the note, they default, and you take the house. Every board of it. It reverts to you free and clear, and there's not a court in this state that'll stop you, because you'll have done everything by the book, and they'll have done everything against it." I looked out the little gable window at the ridgeline Carol never got to see, and I should have felt triumphant. I'd built a snare 2 years ago, and the people who'd hurt me had walked right into it, but all I felt was tired, and one cold question turning over and over in my chest. Why? Why did they need that money so badly that they'd risk everything for it? A man doesn't blow up his whole life over a crib. I told Marcus to draft the foreclosure papers, get every document lined up, have it ready to fire the second I gave the word, and then I told him to do nothing. "Earl," he said, "they broke the agreement. Pull the trigger. End it." "Not yet," I said. "They're greedy, Marcus, but they're not crazy. People don't get this desperate over nothing. There's something underneath this. Somebody's pulling on that $250,000 from somewhere I can't see, and if I burn the house down today, I'll get the house and I'll never know what really happened to my boy. I need one more thing. I need to know the why." So I decided to give them exactly what they thought they already had, a defeated old man. For 2 weeks I played the part. I shuffled. I kept my eyes down. I said yes to everything. When she told me my Social Security ought to go toward the household expenses now that I was part of the home, I said, of course. When my son barely grunted at me in the hall, I just nodded and climbed my attic stairs. I made myself small and slow and harmless until they stopped seeing me at all. And a man you've stopped seeing is a man who can stand in the next room and hear everything. And one of those nights I heard everything. I'd gone down for water around 11. The kitchen was dark, and through the wall, from the back patio where she liked to take her calls, I could hear his wife's voice, low and quick, and nothing like the syrup she poured on me at dinner. I stood still in the dark with my glass in my hand, and I listened. She was talking to a man, not my son. My son was asleep upstairs. She was telling this man to just hang on a little longer, that the equity line had hit a snag, but she'd find another way to get the money out, that once she had it, they'd be gone before the old man or the husband. That's what she called my son. The husband, before either of us figured out which way she'd run. She laughed, soft and ugly, and she said, "Honey, I didn't pick these people by accident. The old man's loaded and the husband's an idiot. It was the easiest play I ever ran. I'm not ashamed to tell you I almost dropped the glass. There was no baby. There never had been. There was a man named Victor she'd been seeing since before the wedding, and there was a plan to strip my family for every dollar she could get her hands on and disappear, and my son, my boy, was just a dumb door she'd walk through to get to my money. I went back up those stairs in the dark, and I did not sleep. But somewhere in the grey hours of that morning, the grief in me cooled into something steadier and harder, the way concrete cures. By sunrise, I knew what I was going to do, and I knew it had to be done with proof, not a story, because here's a truth I learned at 72. A man will believe a liar he loves over an honest man he's wronged, every single time, unless you put the truth in his hand where he can't look away from it. So the next week, I borrowed a little recorder from a fellow at my old church who does security work, a tiny thing, and I set it where I'd heard her take her calls. I'm not proud of it, but I'm not sorry either, and it took 4 nights. But on the 4th night, she said it all again, plainer than before. Victor's name, the money, the plan to run, and the line that I will hear in my head until the day I follow Carol into the ground. He thinks I'm carrying his kid. That's the leash. That's the only reason he hasn't asked questions. I had it. I had the why, I had the who, and I had a recording of my daughter-in-law confessing the whole scheme in her own voice. Now, I could have just played it for my son, but I'd raised that boy, and I knew his heart, and I knew if I came to him with a recording and an accusation, he'd find some way to defend her, because admitting the truth would mean admitting he'd been a fool, and pride is the last thing a drowning man lets go of. I needed him to hear it for himself, and I needed him to hear it after she'd shown her own hand. So I waited for the equity line to die. And it did. The bank called Marcus. Marcus confirmed the first lien, and the whole $250,000 scheme collapsed. I watched it land on her over dinner 2 nights later, watched her stab at her plate and snap at my son over nothing, watched her start making more calls out on that patio, more frantic now. The leash slipping. A cornered animal stops being careful. That Saturday, with my son home and the recorder in my shirt pocket, I came down from the attic and I asked them both to sit at the table. My son sighed like I was the chore he'd been dreading. His wife crossed her arms. I set my phone on the table and I told them I had something they needed to hear, and I played it. I watched my son's face the whole time. I watched it the way you watch a building come down, the first crack, the long pause, and then the whole thing going at once. He heard Victor's name, he heard about the money, and then he heard her laughing about the baby that didn't exist, the leash, the idiot husband, and the color just drained out of him until he was the gray of wet ash. She tried, of course. She stood up, she called it doctored, she called me a sick, jealous old man who couldn't stand to see his son happy. She reached for my son's arm and said, "Baby, you know me, you know this is insane." And for one terrible second I thought he might take her hand. But my son looked at her, and he looked at me, and he looked at that little phone sitting on the table between us, and he said very quietly, "There's no baby." And she didn't have an answer fast enough. The half-second of silence was the whole confession. That silence told my boy everything the recording had, and worse. She left that night. Threw what she could into the German SUV my money had helped lease and was gone before midnight, off to find Victor or whatever was next, and I'll tell you the truth, I never wanted her to suffer. I just wanted her gone, and out of the reach of anyone else's son. But there was still the matter of the house, and here's where I had to do the hardest thing I've ever done. Harder than burying Carol almost, because at least with Carol I had no choice. I called Marcus and I told him to fire the foreclosure. My son didn't understand at first. The next morning, hollow-eyed at the kitchen table, he asked me what we were going to do now, and I told him there was no we, not in this house, because this house was about to belong to me. I walked him through it slow. The note, the lien, the clause his wife had tripped when she filed that application. I told him the law was on my side down to the last comma, and that in 30 days the house he was sitting in would be mine, and he would have to go. He stared at me like I'd struck him. "You're throwing me out," he said. "After all this, she's the one who. I'm your son. And I said the words that had been forming in me since that gray morning in the attic. I said, "You're my son. That's exactly why I'm doing it. If I let you keep this house, a house you didn't earn, that a con artist almost stole, that your old man had to rescue from your own blindness, you will never once in your life learn to stand on your own 2 feet. You'll go right back to letting the next pretty voice do your thinking for you. I'm not punishing you, son. I'm taking the floor out from under you because it was never your floor, and you need to find out what you can build when nobody hands you anything." He didn't say anything. He just put his face in his hands. 30 days later, the house was mine, free and clear, every board of it, just like Marcus said. My son moved out into a one-bedroom apartment over by the interstate, the kind of place I lived in when I was 22 and first married to Carol, before I ever owned a single nail. He took it hard. He lost weight. He didn't call for a while, and I let him not call, because some lessons you can only learn in the quiet. But here's what I want you to know, because the people in the comments always ask me if I'm just a cruel old man. About a month after he moved out, my son called me, not to ask for anything. He called to tell me he'd gotten a job, a real one, swinging a hammer for a framing crew, my old trade, though he didn't say it like that, and neither did I. He sounded tired. He sounded humbled. And underneath it, for the first time in years, he sounded like a man. I let him sit with that job for half a year. Then one evening, I called him up and I told him I had a problem he might be able to help me with. I'd kept the house, but it was too much house for one old man, and I was thinking of starting up a small contracting outfit again. Nothing big, fixing up old homes for folks who couldn't afford the big companies. I needed somebody honest to run a crew, somebody who'd learned the hard way what a dollar costs. I made it clear it was a job, not a gift. He'd start at the bottom. He'd earn every cent. He'd never see a dime of the money I'd set aside. That's for the long down the road, for grandkids if there ever turn out to be real ones, not for him to lean on. But he'd have a chance, and a chance is the most you can honestly give a grown man. He was quiet a long time on the phone, and then he said, "Yeah, Dad, I'll take it, and I'm sorry. For all of it. I should have protected you. I should have seen her. I'm sorry." I told him in apologies, just the footing. You still have to build the house on top of it. He starts Monday. So here's what 50 years in the building trade and 72 years of living taught me, and I'll give it to you straight before you go. Love your children with everything you've got, but never confuse loving them with handing them the keys to your whole life on the strength of a promise. A promise isn't collateral. Put it in writing every time, and if the people you love get offended that you protected yourself, then you've just learned exactly how much they plan to respect you. They called me a clueless old man, and maybe I was clueless about a lot of things, about how cold the people at my own table could be. But I was never clueless about a contract, and the same careful streak they laughed at is the only reason I'm not eating cat food in a rented room tonight while a stranger named Victor spends my retirement. The hardest part wasn't taking the house. The hardest part was letting my own son fall when every cell in my body wanted to catch him. But I've poured a lot of foundations in my life, and I'll tell you something. You cannot build anything that lasts on ground you didn't dig out first. Sometimes the most loving thing a father can do isn't to lift his son up, it's to let him hit the bottom so he finally finds out the bottom is solid enough to stand on. So you tell me, since you've come all this way with me tonight, was I too hard on my boy throwing him out with nothing? Or was taking that house away the only thing that could have ever saved him? Tell me down in the comments. I read every one. And tell me where you're listening from. Because I've got a feeling I'm not the only old man out there who learned this lesson the expensive way. The day I carried that first box up the pull-down stairs to the room over the garage, I told myself I was being patient. I wasn't. I was being afraid. And fear dressed up as patience is the most expensive coat a man can wear. Because it cost me 6 weeks of sleeping in a freezing attic while a stranger ran a con under my own roof. Everything that happened to me happened in order. The way one beam holds up the next, I let grief make me careless. So I let 2 people I loved move into my judgment. They mistook my kindness for weakness, so they got bolder. They got bolder, so they got sloppy. And the day my daughter-in-law signed those papers behind my back, she set in motion every single thing that came after. Nobody threw that family out of that house. They walked themselves out, one bad choice at a time, and I just held the door. I think about my son a lot now, watching him swing a hammer on that framing crew, leaner and quieter than he used to be. The thing that nearly ruined him wasn't that he was stupid. It was that he never learned to look hard at a thing before he trusted it. He believed a pretty story about a baby that never existed because believing it was easier than asking questions. And I'll own my part in that because I'm the one who raised him soft, who paid for everything, who taught him by accident that somebody would always catch him. The kindest thing I ever did for that boy was the hardest, and it was letting him hit the floor and find out it would hold his weight. If you take anything from what happened to me in Carol's memory in the house we almost lost, take this. Be the kind of person whose word and whose paperwork say the same thing. Because a man who keeps his honesty clean has nothing a liar can use against him. Keep your eyes open, even when your heart is wide open. Because love without clear seeing is just a blindfold somebody else gets to tie. And when the moment comes that you have to do the hard, lonely thing, do it standing up, the way I made myself walk down those attic stairs with that recorder in my pocket, when every part of me wanted to hide. Greed turned a charming woman into a thief, and a good son into a coward, and the only thing that stood against it was an old man's refusal to quit being careful. I'm 72. I sleep in a real bed again now, in the house I saved, and I've learned that decency, a clear head, and the backbone to act on both are not three separate things. They're one rope, and you'd better start braiding it long before the day you need it to hold.